we had to ramp up the Zoom limit to be able to accommodate everyone. So I'm very happy for this. So I'll just...
And there are high school students too. I wanted to let you know. Many 12th standard students have logged in also, have registered. So.
All right, so I'm just going to admit everyone now.
Arun Tirvengadam says he's waiting to be put in. Okay.
Yeah, they're all coming in now.
Nandan, how are you? Thank you again. I know you must have been busy closing deals in the middle of Thanksgiving. I did not know you are now the global head energy practice. You know, somebody asked me.
Americas.
That's even more intense. Someone asked me, how is he an international lawyer? I said, that is the impoverished understanding of what an international lawyer is. It's the quintessential cross. Didn't you do arbitration also in the early days of Double and all that? You've been involved in that.
Yeah. I was involved. Yeah, no, I didn't specialize. Yeah.
But you must still be dealing with the litigators all the time, right? So,
yeah.
So, and I was just thinking, you know, to me, it's not just international law in a core sense, because none of us, other than maybe Anjali, deal with that. It's, you know, I mean, Samir and I do policy, and then Gitanji does real politics, and you kind of do global cross-border work. So
exactly.
All right. So I'm just going to start in another 15-20 seconds.
Where is Sudhir?
He should be in the call. We have about 300 people, so it's a little hard to check.
He's there. I can see him. Hi, Sudhir.
You can see. How do you see people?
Oh
wow. Oh wow. Okay. How are you, Sudhir? Hello, Vice Chancellor. How are you?
He's muted. You're muted, Sudhir. You're muted.
I also see Professor Prabhakar Singh from Jindal. Good. Professor Mandendra Singh from DNLU. Good.
Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to reposition myself. Give me a second.
How are you, Professor Pillai? Thank you for joining us.
Professor Pillai is just listening.
Oh, okay, good.
We had a good talk about 10-15 minutes before.
All right, so let's begin. We have everyone. So welcome and good evening, everyone, or good afternoon or good morning, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Rag Yadava. I'm an assistant professor at the law school and also an alum from the batch of 2013. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this alumni panel discussion on careers in international law and relations, which we've organized in partnership with the Student Bar Association and the newly formed Council for International Law and International Relations, which is a student-led body. This is the first in a series of alumni-led career events at the law school. We have an absolutely star-studded panel lined up for you today. Proud to say, starting from the very first batch of the law school with the panel represents a diverse cross-section of the world of international law and relations. And I'm hoping that the large participation that we have from students and young professionals across India from our discussion today. Before I introduce the panel, I'm very happy to say that we have today with us Vikram Bhagavan from the batch of 1997, with whom I'll be moderating today's discussion. Vikram has had a 20-year-long distinguished career at the World Bank, and he's currently the lead counsel at the office in DC. He's the bank's legal advisor for conflict, refugees, and macroeconomics, and is currently advising the bank on the legal aspects of COVID financing as part of his larger work on addressing humanitarian crises around the world. For students, I can say on a personal note, students and young professionals of the law school, Vikram has constantly been a source of support and inspiration. So I'm very glad to have him back at NLS in this remote form. I'm also very happy to say that we have a very strong participation of close to now 400 people, which I think is one of the largest audiences we've had for any panel discussion at law school. And they come from, again, much like the panel, a very diverse cross-section of all major law schools in India. We have young professionals from the policy sector, from academia, from law firms. We also have senior members of the community, senior lawyers and faculty of the National Law School, and as I was just told, several high school students as well. So I'm hoping that we can speak to everyone in this 1 hour that we have. Just very quickly, this panel discussion was an idea that sprung up from the growing interest in international law and relations at NLS and I think law schools across India. But also an issue which many students were facing because this area is still quite uncertain and is relatively uncharted terrain for a lot of students and young professionals in India. So I'm hoping that this panel discussion allows them to navigate this field and to see what the world of international law and relations looks like. Before I turn to Vikram, I'd also like to welcome Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy, who is the Vice Chancellor of the National Law School, the first alumni to be the Vice Chancellor of the National Law School as well. And Sudhir has put international law and developing a strong international law program at the very forefront of this priority list. And Sudhir, can I invite you to say a few words before we start the discussion?
Thank you, Rag. Trust I'm coming through clearly. Good evening, or good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us and welcome to the National Law School. Rag mentioned a few minutes ago that the National Law School is pushing hard to establish a strong presence in the field of international law. You can see with a panel like this that we have illustrious alums who have distinguished themselves in all fields, all different parts of the international law professional fields. And what we are trying to do and bring to NLS is academic work of the highest quality, both teaching and research, and policy work in this field in the years to come. So I'm very glad to announce that we will call and put out an essay competition in the name of late Shri Justice Jayasimha Babu, sponsored by an alum for a top paper in the field of international law. So look out for that for all of you who are interested in these questions. You can anticipate that in the month of December. But more robustly, we want to build institutional capacity, faculty, and teaching and research in this field. And there are so many illustrious members in this audience. I just invite all of you to chip in and with your suggestions and participate in this process in the best way possible. This panel is a great initiative in this direction, and I look forward to listening in. It's a field that I'll do more listening than speaking on. So I just pass it back to Rag. Thanks for getting this started, Rag and Vikram, and all the best.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for those words. I'm now going to just hand it over to Vikram to introduce the panel, and then we'll jump straight into the discussion. Can I just, before we start, ask everyone to please mute their mics, especially the participants and the audience. There's some background disturbance, and we'd like to cut that out. Vikram?
Thank you, Rag, and thank you, Vice Chancellor Sudhir Krishnaswamy. We are honored by your invitation. I also want to recognize several faculty of the National Law School, Professor Padmanabha Pillai, faculty from other law schools, Professor Prabhakar Singh, I see, Professor Manvendra Tiwari from DNLU, he's from Jindal. And then I noticed there are lots of other alumni who've joined the room. I also want to welcome the law students from many, many, many law schools. I think there are over 50 or 60. Every NLU is here and every non-NLU is also here. We don't make a distinction. And also high school students. I want to welcome you all. I noticed a couple of them said they want to do careers, so that's very inspiring. We had this idea a long time ago to do this because every year I go to the law school and try and offer this event with the faces of the alumni who aren't there. And I thought this, what better time to actually have an event like this where we can actually get the alumni, because everyone is in this peculiar situation. You can't go anywhere. And it's a way to, your excuses to join are limited. And so I'm very grateful to our co-panelists who joined. So I thought rather than reading long bios, because people get bored by them, I'm just going to do a very quick introduction, because the theme of this discussion, since we have 6 speakers and we want to get as many of your questions in, is to speak quickly and just keep ourselves to 2 minutes, and try to do that myself too. But I begin first with my good friend Nandan Nelivigi. He's the first alumni from National Law School, from the first batch to make it to Harvard Law School, to join an international law firm, to make partner at an international law firm. He is the America's practice head for energy at the law firm at White & Case. For many of you who know, it's a massive international law firm with branches all over the world. He also headed the India practice, and we're very proud of him. All of those of us who are from the early batches really looked up to Nandan because he really, pushed I think even applying for an LLM, which today is so, par for the course, is largely because of Nandan and his some of his other classmates. But he really was one of the first NLU students to break that barrier. And someone asked me the other day, how is he an international lawyer? I said, he's a quintessential international lawyer because he practices law across global jurisdictions. So this idea that international law is this very specific thing of boundary disputes, or something practicing only at the ICJ, which we also have my dear friend and classmate Anjali Singh to talk about, because that is pretty cool. But there is a much bigger tent of international law. Our next panelist is Anjali herself. She's my classmate and I've known her well, and obviously we know each other socially. But I have to say I was stunned last night reading through all the cases you've argued. If heavens won't fall, Harish Salve can be the great, so great because he's arguing one case in the ICJ. I think Anjali Singh's resume would put him or anyone else into shame. She has literally argued some of the leading cases before the International Court of Justice, the Congo case on armed activities, many cases involving boundary disputes, of course, and then, of course, several cases at the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. And I think she's a moot courter's delight in the sense she mentions where she was counsel and where she drafted the oral submissions, which we all know is also equally important. But I also know that she's worked extensively with my former professor, Philippe Sands. She's work on international arbitration at the famous law firm of King and Spalding, was consultant and advisor at the Attorney General's Office of Ireland, and was associated with the Matrix Chambers. But just the sheer number of ICJ cases, landmark ICJ cases, I don't think anybody else in the NLS alumni can claim that. So that is really cool. I then move on to my dear friend, Geetanjali, who we are very proud of, an NLS IFS officer. She is someone who is presently, I'm trying to find your present designation, but she is a fascinating career, right? She started off working law at a law firm and then did the civil services. And you know how hard it is to be in the civil services and to get on top, right? You need to really get a high rank. And so she's presently in India's mission to the WTO as a delegate in charge of dispute resolution. Since 2019, she also looks after agriculture, SPS and STE. I don't know what they are. You can talk about it when we come to you. In addition to dispute resolution, before that, she was the secretary in charge of political affairs. It's a no small task, I can tell you, at the Indian Embassy in Paris. She was closely involved in the negotiations for the launch of the International Solar Alliance at the Paris Climate Change Conference, COP21. And the Solar Alliance is actually it's the first organization of its kind with its headquarters in India. So she doesn't say that, but I suspect she was involved in making that happen. She, incidentally, I should also mention Lavanya Rajamani, who is one of our famous alumni, who is probably one of the world's leading experts on climate change, also works in this area. We invited her, but she couldn't join. But I think it's amazing to get Gitanjali to cover that, trade as well as climate. And then, of course, real politics of being a diplomat, because that's where international law relations and policy meet. Then quickly to my dear friend Turod, who I was actually his roommate if he's forgotten about it. But today I had to ask Rag for his resume, and Rag said, what the hell is this guy? He's held virtually every job, and it's true. If you look at his stunning resume, he left law school, he went on to SOAS, and then he came back and he was the head of UNDP, the United Nations Development Programs Office in Mongolia, as the manager for governance. That is a pretty cool job because he has that UN experience. But after that, he's worked in many, many capacities. He's been the advisor to the Mongolian president. He's headed all kinds of offices in relation to a wide variety of subjects, EITI, which is transparency in extractive industries, anti-corruption work, and presently his work at Transparency International Mongolia. We will let him talk a bit more about what he does, but I truly was inspired. And then finally, of course, Neha, who, well, we have got two more, but Neha is the first, who basically is a professor of international law at the European University Institute at Florence, which I say is a pretty cool place. But Neha is one of my personal heroes. She is someone who I think has been tenured in 2 law schools, and that's pretty cool. But last year, she was the co-chair of the American Society of International's annual meeting. Very, very hard to get that. So for an Indian, I think probably one of the first Indian co-chairs. And as recently as this month has published a leading article in the American Journal of International Law on COVID-19. That is a peer-reviewed journal of the highest respect in the field. So we're very, very happy, Neha, that you're joining us, because I know a lot of people who are on this panel have read you. And I think that, you know, there's a lot we expect from you, but I think a lot to learn from as well. Finally, Samir, who is someone I only got to know quite recently, actually, through my present job as advisor for conflict and reconstruction. I was talking to some friends in the UN during the Rohingya Rakhine crisis, and I asked them, how do we know what's going on? And they said, well, there are 3 people in Rakhine from international staff who are allowed. And they said, one is this guy called Samir Saran. And then when I Googled him, I found, wow, this NLS connection, and that's how I introduced him. He was there when, you know, the height of what, you know, we call it different things, atrocities, genocide, ethnic cleansing. We are international lawyers. We have to be careful about nomenclature, but he was there to watch it. Now, maybe we have to wait for his memoirs to explain what actually he saw and happened, but now he moved on to something even more exciting. He is the coordinator for NGOs for the whole of Syria. So you can imagine all the desirables and undesirables he deals with on a day-to-day basis. He also works for the Norwegian Refugee Council. And for those of us who work with the UN or UNHCR or other international humanitarian organizations, know the NRC is a pretty hardcore NGO. They go really, really close to conflict. So if there's anyone who deserves a bravery medal from National Law School alumni, that's him. So anyway, I know I may have made some of you blush, but I do think it's important to recognize the sheer number of diversity of experience. And I'm very privileged to be part of this panel. Okay, with that out of the way, I can maybe begin, right? Rag, we're going to have a conversation. That's the idea here, so that it's not presentations. And we're going to try and keep it brief so that, you know, we can even talk to each other. Now, if we begin with Nandan, you're from the first batch of the law school. What has your journey been leading the energy practice at White & Case? And can you give us a bird's eye view of your journey and the major shifts in the landscape?
Yeah, thank you, Vikram. It's great to see you all and a pleasure to be on this panel. You know, when you first called me to appear on this panel, I was dreading getting on another video conference. But the more I thought about it, and I find that this is such a nice distraction, such a nice joy to be talking about something other than the boring cross-border transactions that you mentioned in your earlier introduction. But it's really great to be talking to a lot of the students from law schools in India, especially the high school students, and provide a little bit of the perspective that hopefully will be useful. So talking about my journey, Vikram, I got to be honest and tell everybody, the journey was not with a particular destination in mind. It was not a well-laid plan when I started off in this, and somehow stumbled upon the world of energy and infrastructure, and I've ended up and stayed here. You were talking about how I'm an international lawyer. Thank you for explaining it and not making me defend it. But it's a curious question, a definitional question about what practice of international law is. If you look at private international law, I definitely do not practice cross-border tortious claims or matrimonial disputes or property disputes. That's one definition of private international law, I guess. And there are aspects of public international law that a lot of other co-panelists here are steeped in. But it's been a journey of trying to really discover what practicing international law means. There are so many dimensions to it. And my own sort of reminder to myself again and again is that I'm not done trying to discover what all these different aspects of international law are. And every day I learn something new. And now as sort of the head of the Americas energy infrastructure and project finance practice, I deal with about 120 lawyers and their practices here in the Americas, in North America and in Latin America. And I deal with a number of our lawyers who are involved in our cross-border India practice. And every day I learn so many different things that many of my colleagues are engaged in. And it's just a process of trying to really understand all the kinds of issues and types of practices that my colleagues are engaged in. Anyway, so there's not a single day that goes by, Vikram, that I think about maybe I should be doing something else. It may be cross-border international arbitration, like a lot of my colleagues do, which is a fascinating area, or the kind of practice that Anjali is engaged in, appearing before the ICJ or the Supreme Court. So it's not really a set path, but this is just happens to be the path that I've ended up in. So let me pause there and see if there was anything else I should have covered in this first, little introduction.
Nandan, I think that was a fantastic and very humbling response to hear that you're still trying to understand and learn what a practice of international law involves, which is, I think, something that all of us who are much younger, especially students and young professionals, can relate to. On that note, I'd like to turn to Gitanjali. Gitanjali, you, after graduating from the law school, worked at an Indian law firm for 2 years, and then took a radical shift to join the Foreign Service, where you have dealt with climate change matters, you've dealt, like Vikram said, with matters dealing with agriculture and handling India's trade disputes in Geneva. Did you have, was your journey with a destination, or how did that work out for you?
Thanks, Rag, and thank you for, before I begin answering the question, thanks for Vikram and Rag for inviting me to be part of this really illustrious panel. There are several people on this panel that I've looked up to ever since I've joined law school, and so I'm extremely interested in also hearing about their journeys post-law school. Coming to your question, Rag, no, I think, like Nandan said, we're constantly, however far we get in our careers, we're constantly reevaluating and thinking about what we should be doing, whether we're on the right track and so on. So I think it wasn't really with the destination in mind, but my journey began, it was fairly par for the course and like the sort of default option to go to a law firm, a corporate law firm right out of law school. At least for my batch, that's what the great majority of my batch did. And that was supposed to be just sort of your taking off first step, and then you sort of mulled over it and decided what you would want to do in the long term. But I was always very curious about world affairs and foreign policy and international relations. So I did know that I would like to do something in that space. Having gotten a law firm experience, for a bit I toyed with the idea of perhaps pursuing academia in this area. And that's something I still do every day. After I quit the corporate law firm job where I worked as a capital markets lawyer for about 2 years, I considered joining the National Judicial Academy. I was offered a position there. And two very illustrious law school alum, Mrinal Satish and Aparna Chandra, were already there. Professor Mohan Gopal was there. I did consider it because I thought if I do this, then that could be a stepping stone to perhaps a career in legal academia. But I was also equally interested in being a practitioner of realpolitik. So I decided to make the sort of arduous and difficult decision of writing the UPSC exam, which is a long and arduous process. And fortunately, it worked out. And ever since, I think it's been a steep learning curve. It's been a very enriching journey since then, because part of the reason I wanted to get into the Foreign Service is because of the sheer variety of roles that it offers you, the kind of work that you get to do. It's not, which again, we'll come to the generalist versus specialist question, because I know that's something you'd like to discuss at a later point. But for now, I'll just say that it was quite a meandering journey. It wasn't really with a strict destination in mind, but I'm very happy with the way it's turned out. Thank you.
Thanks, Gitanjali. I think if I can make a small personal digression, I think mine and most people's journeys are often very meandering. So you often wonder if you've gotten lost. So it's very nice to hear that you can meander about and still reach someplace that matters. I'm going to go out on a limb here and ask Anjali, when I read the cases that you have done, you seem to have had a very focused and clear path from the get-go. You have been a classic traditional public international law practitioner in some of the most major cases at the ICJ, at the ITLOS, in Britain, in Ireland, and with a range of governments now. How did you possibly imagine a career in international law at the time when you graduated from law school, when it was just outside the scope of imagination for most people?
To cut a very long story short, I didn't imagine one at all. First, I want to say thank you to you for inviting me and to Vikram for convincing me. This is the first webinar that I've attended, let alone been a participant at. But I feel like an imposter on this very impressive panel, not least because I'm completely an accidental international lawyer. I finished law school where I really enjoyed my public international law courses, but I had no plans to pursue it as a career. I really didn't visualize becoming a practitioner. Like you said, when we graduated, even internships seemed pretty unavailable if you were graduating from an Indian university back then. So after finishing law school, I opted for litigation simply because I had zero interest in corporate law. And everyone seemed to be heading in that direction. But honestly, my eyes still glaze over when most of my classmates talk about corporate law. I litigated for 2 years with an AOR at the Supreme Court, and then I decided to do an LLM in public international law. And at the LLM, at the end of the LLM, very serendipitously, one of my professors was looking for a research assistant for 6 months to work on a case. And so I applied, got the position, and that was to work on filing a memorial for a genocide case before the ICJ. And my job at that point was, I think, to read about 400 witness statements. And that pretty much was my job description. We filed that memorial in 2000, and that case was decided in 2015. But it was also the first case where I started as a research assistant, and it was the first case that I argued before the court. Also, just to go back, Vikram very extra generously said that I'd argued several cases. I've argued only one before the ICJ. I've argued others before other tribunals, but only the one in the ICJ. So I have more than Salve overall, but less than Salve at the ICJ. Anyway, so I worked in chambers for 2 years, and I still actually work with the same barrister that I started working for back in 2000. After the memorial was filed, I was working on some cases for the Irish government, and they offered me a job to come in-house to work at the Attorney General's office. So even though I was working in Ireland, I was working on 2 interstate arbitrations, I wasn't doing any Irish law. I did that, and then I worked with a US law firm doing investor state arbitration, and very quickly realized that I didn't like working for investors. I much preferred working for sovereign states. So yeah, that's basically how that happened. And then like I said, 20 years later, I worked on a bunch of cases covering genocide, international humanitarian law, things like marine pollution, maritime delimitation. Yeah, I think that's basically been my journey. And I got lucky because I came back to India in 2007. And fortunately for me, there were a couple of cases that I'd worked on for, at the written pleading stage. And those went to hearing at courts after I returned. And the countries that I represented basically were happy to have me back to appear, at the court. So I did that. And then one of those clients had another case and they called me back, to be a part of the legal team for that. So that's why I'm sitting here, but I still manage to do a couple of cases every now and then. So it's serendipity and accident purely, not planned in the least.
Okay, thanks very much, Anjali. I thought we can move quickly to Samir. Now, Samir, I did give you this fulsome introduction, but I still have to say I used to often confuse you with the other Samir who ran, that tacos joint in London. But then when I finally figured out who you were, as I've seen respect all around. Now, you're a human rights lawyer focusing on international humanitarian law, refugee law. It's a very interesting intersection, right? In a conflict zone. Many of us study this from an academic perspective. I sit from the distance in Washington and am able to deal with it without actually getting my fingers dirty or being on the ground. You've been in the toughest war zones and you're working on the toughest countries. How did you get in there? And I should acknowledge, as I think we discussed, there are 3 other NLS alumni who work in this area, 3 in UNHCR, Yamini Pandey, Arjun Jain, and Sarah Khan. So I'm sure you've dealt with them too. But tell us, how you entered this field.
Thanks, Vikram. I think similar to Anjali, you may have talked me up a bit extra, and I think also you are talking the other Samir Singh. I think he's much more than someone who established that business. But anyway, I think I went into law school without really a design to study law, and without really knowing once I was at law school what I was going to do with law. I did stay in law school at least for the first 2 years because I really liked my student experience. And I think instead of academics, I did actually immerse myself in all the other opportunities that were there at NLS for me. And that really kept me interested and wanted to stay there. And I think then through my first internship and my second internship was slowly how I started finding my passion for what I wanted to do with law and realizing what all could be done with law as opposed to the traditional ways in which many people practice law. My first internship was with a small NGO called Common Cause. After that, I went on to do an internship with Human Rights Law Network in Bombay. And I think that's how I slowly started realizing that maybe this idea of using law to work on social justice issues is something that speaks to me. I liked the way that people who I work with who practice that area of law went about doing their work and the sort of satisfaction that they seem to get from it. And I think it was sort of through that and then one internship leading to another is how I found my focus in the area of law. And towards the later part of my law school years, I had the opportunity to choose seminar courses based on something that I was interested in. And then I chose to focus on human rights subjects. So by the time I was graduating, I think I knew what I liked about law, how I wanted to use law, and the area in which I wanted to work. And after that, I think it's been, again, a journey of finding what kind of jobs interest me, what kind of jobs make me want to apply myself, where do I find the satisfaction of using my legal training. And often it has been in the area of international human rights law. I work with national human rights institutions, international human rights institutions, national government institutions, as well as some UN agencies and some international NGOs in the humanitarian sector. And I think it's been a constant sort of journey of discovering all that I know, all that I don't know, how to constantly look at human rights issues with a way to having more impact from my work, and also trying to grapple with the overwhelming sense of frustration and disappointment that forms a majority of my work, because it's not often very possible for me to see the impact of my work or have the goals achieved in my work. So I think it's also a constant journey of trying to stay grounded and trying to stay motivated while still realizing how little difference many of these things make. So I think that's also been a big part of my work, trying to stay motivated and trying to use the best of my abilities to continue working towards that goal of social justice in various forms that I see that first drew me to this work. So I think it's been a sort of journey of discovery of my passion for law in law school, and then since then as well as to what do I really want to keep doing and what step next do I want to take in this sort of continuing journey.
Okay, thank you, Samir. If we move on to Thurod, now we know each other for many years. You came to NLS with your other colleague, Odbayar, as an international student, having never lived outside India, or perhaps you did, but it was a certain culture shock. You stayed 5 years with us, and then you graduated. You're actually very proud of your NLS connection. I noticed that, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, your Indian connection. And then you did an LLM at SOAS and proceeded then to work in transparency, commerce, banking, and all the other things I mentioned at the start. Was this always on the cards to have this sort of, really multifaceted career in the law, but also touching all these areas of policy and your work with civil society?
Right. So thank you, Raghavan, for also very enormously, I think, lavish, I think, introduction. And greetings to all again, from cold and snow Ulaanbaatar, minus 23, 25 Celsius. So warmest regards to all. So let me start by saying that, again, I think it was a totally accidental venture, including to India, back in 1992. For me, I think since I was already an intern with my other friend, Odbayar, Odu, there were only two of us from Mongolia in India. I think we were the first ones and also the last ones who have graduated in the National Law School, unfortunately, as far as I know. Although there have been many now Mongolians, like I think thousands of them studying in India at present. So we were actually sent by our Ministry of Justice to study economics and business laws, so it was a total surprise to me, at least personally, that the National Law School offered both kind of a legal subject, but also social sciences, And during last, I think, again, as I think, would say it has been a kind of an unexpected journey, including in the international relations and international law field, for me. So 3 books have accompanied me for the last 28 years. One is this economics. I don't know whether you can, for the law students at the pre-law school series. Another was this political theory and organization. And last but not least, international relations and organization for law students. I think the edition is 1991. So I had, I think, also a very I think fortunate, I think, to study in India in particular, but also to learn English along the legal and social sciences subject, because Odbayar and I, we spoke only Russian as our second language because it was mandatory at that time. It was also for us a culture shock in a way, because at that time we were part of the still, let's say, the communist bloc or socialist countries, But what was surprising me for me was that in India and Mongolia, we took the similar way of, the liberalization, the economic reforms, but also political reforms in Mongolia. So I took actually a chance, So I was back after graduation to work as at the Mongolian Administrative Service as a civil servant with the Ministry of Justice for 3 years, and have been part of the this drafting of the new civil code, So I think as much as I could, I think we tried to integrate also this common law, the traditions of India with the what you call the continental or civil law systems. And then I think, how did it turn into international relations? Because there was of course, it was mid 1990s, so there were not many. I would even say it was rare for a civil servants who spoke fluently or could understand, at least, I mean, especially with the legal expertise. So they put me in charge of the international organizations, and international legal cooperation. And that's how I started the journey. I was in charge, responsible for preparing the Mongolia government reports on the implementation of the International Covenant on civil and political rights, and then had to work closely with the UN system, including with the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. So when at the end of at the UN system, they offered me a job. Actually, it was a secondment. I took that offer, let's say, without looking back, although it was for a year, and I was offered actually a promotion as a head of the division at the Ministry of Justice. So I left that, and it happened that it was not 1 year secondment, but turned out 6 years of experience with the UN system, working from starting from like anti-poverty, microfinance issues to anti-corruption, judicial, and election reform. So I would say I was always, in a way, also inspired by my, let's say, batchmates, who took a career in the international, let's say, organizations, including like Vikram Raghavan. So day on, I think it went, it spiraled, but I choose, and I also had an opportunity to become an international civil servant, like for a life, but I also left that and took a new opportunity to work in the first microfinance bank institution in Mongolia, who now is fifth or fourth largest commercial bank in Mongolia. And of course, the international relations helped me a lot, because bringing in the as a shareholders, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and the International Finance Corporation, for example, and then back to the civil servant with the Office of the Prime Minister as advisor, leading the Mongolia Economic Forum, which is associated with the Davos Forum. And of course, as Vikram mentioned, working as a legal advisor and assistant to the president of Mongolia for the judicial reforms and anti-corruption reforms. So this is how I think I took it. But where I ended up was actually working and supporting international civil society organizations, there are and many of them are actually multi-stakeholder partnerships within the government, civil society, and the private sector, including what Vikram mentioned, the EITI, but also open government partnership and several host of others. So let me actually stop here and let our moderators to take on, let's say the revelations from our panel speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Turod, for that. It's fantastic to see that you still have material from law school times that you still refer to. And I think Vikram was right. I referred to you as you were the alter ego of the Mongolian government, because you seem to have participated in every single branch of government and civil society. So we'll get into more detail about that, and we'd love to hear about how exactly you structured your work. I'm going to turn to Neha. Neha, you are the only pure-blood academic amongst us in international law, and you have researched and taught at some of the centers of international legal scholarship at Oxford, at the Lauterpacht Center in Cambridge, at Freiburg, and now with the European University Institute in Florence. Can you describe what the life of an international law academic looks like, and how you have developed your career, and whether it was something that you thought of right from law school, or unlike the other panelists, something that came to you later on?
Thanks for this. Before, I think this is picking up on something you said earlier to Gitanjali, that, you have a meandering path and sometimes you feel lost, to which I can only quote Tolkien: not all those who wander are lost. So you can have a fairly meandering path, but with a clear sense of where you want to be, or at least next. And I think that was true for me as much as anybody else. I think what you've seen in this panel is that is the role of serendipity, chance, and also the fact that almost none of us had a linear path. It was reaching to the next step and then recalibrating our mental world and the set of opportunities that's then open to us, rather than having a set destination at the end from the very beginning. What was true in my case, though, is that I'm a geek. I love ideas. And that's the thing I care most about in the world. And that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to look at ideas. And international law, and what I found in international law is a set of ideas that keeps on giving. So it was addictive. So that part was constant. That hasn't changed. That's been me since I was sentient, I suppose. But the various steps in that path, though, have not been the same. So I was fortunate. In the last year of law school, I was fortunate to get the Rhodes in my year, and I went off to Oxford, to the BCL, to the DPhil, as most people who get the Rhodes, including Sudhir, of course. That's the path that all of us took after the Rhodes. But as it happened, at that point, I was working on international criminal law, and my PhD thesis involved a very, very dense part of German criminal law theory, for which I would have needed to learn German and German criminal law, which is not something you learn at Oxford. And I also needed to figure out how this doctrine will then be used in practice. So I did two different things. I went off to Cambodia, worked in the office of the prosecutor for the Khmer Rouge Tribunal for about 6 months. The tribunal, the OTP, the office of the prosecutor, had still not filed their first indictment. And we were a very small team. So it meant I got really excellent hands-on experience, made some friends for life, got some terrific mentors in the field. And then I needed to learn German and German criminal law quite quickly. The easiest way to do that was to move to Germany. So moved to Germany and got a part-time job at the Max Planck Institute for International Criminal Law, which is the center for comparative criminal law in the world, possibly, but most certainly in Germany. And because I was working part-time, I could work for the rest of the time on just improving my German skills, reading in German, and finishing the PhD. And then as I was finishing the DPhil, I applied for some postdocs in the US, got selected with some fortune at Georgetown. And that was a 2-year fellowship, which gives you space to research and read and write, and prepares you specifically for the American job market. So I got my first job in the US without ever having planned to move to the US initially. At the University of Minnesota Law School in 2012. I got tenure 5 years later. And then I'd always wanted to be at the EUI ever since I'd heard about it, partly because of Florence. There are worse places to be in a lockdown or even outside a lockdown. So I always wanted to be at the EUI and applied for the position when it came up, got the position. And so now I'm on a 5-year leave from Minnesota here. So I've got 5 years to wander around in Florence, reacquaint myself with the European tradition in international law, which is quite specific in some ways. But it's been partly happenstance, all the different jurisdictions and all the different places. I never thought I would be living in Florence and speaking Italian and have an opera singer disturbing my research every single day from the neighborhood apartment. So it's none of it was planned in that sense.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Neha. Thank you very much. Gitanjali, we're going to sort of pick up the pace here because I think while the retrospectives have been good, I think we're also we want to get in as many questions from the audience, and so people can start putting in the chat, and we'll try and combine them. But Gitanjali, you currently handle India's WTO cases in Geneva, agriculture, SP and SPT. You have to tell us what that means. But what is representing? What is essentially involved in a diplomat representing her country on a day-to-day basis? And I mentioned you were involved with the setting up of the Solar Alliance in Paris. How much do you call upon or use your legal training and knowledge of international law in your day-to-day work? I've discussed this with your other colleague in the IFS, who we are also very proud of, Aparna Pai, who is now First Secretary in our High Commission in Islamabad. And she always talked about how, as an international lawyer by training, she was in the policy shop at MEA. But I'm curious to you, in your training, in working on multilateral treaty negotiations of climate change, does that give you a leg up?
For sure, certainly. I think a legal training equips you with, so the way you approach legal text, especially my job right now, I got it because I had a legal background, because in order to apply to the mission, India's mission to the WTO, specifically for the role where you're the lead negotiator for dispute settlement and other issues, it's a mandatory requirement to have a legal degree and legal training. And of course, because when I came to this position in December 2017, there was a lot of, I had to get up to speed with a lot of things, because WTO law is, again, a very niche, very specific area of international trade law. There's a fair bit of jurisprudence, although right now, with all of everything that's going on with the WTO and the churn that the multilateral trading system is saying, jurisprudence or precedent is not a popular term. But moving on from that, there's the WTO's appellate body and panel systems have produced more than 800 rulings and decisions in the last 25 years. Since its inception, it's been one of the most prolific international tribunals, coupled with the fact that it actually has binding repercussions for member states. So in that sense, it gives it a lot more teeth, because members can retaliate. They can resort to, once they have the go-ahead from a WTO adjudicatory body, they can inflict sizable damage. So in that sense, the stakes are very high, and members come really prepared. So handling the dispute settlement dossier at the mission, of course, I mean, a legal education and training in the law was of tremendous help. Also for agriculture, and because agriculture is a very sensitive file for India. And we have a lot of interests in the way the agricultural negotiations are moving at the WTO, because the way it is, I mean, I don't want to bore you with the history of all of it, but since the Doha round, things have been stuck. There's a lot of asymmetry in the existing agreements, because at the end of the Uruguay round, most developing countries didn't have the kind of economic heft or even political bargaining power to ensure that areas of their interest got taken into account in the treaties. So there is a lot of asymmetry. And so the interesting thing now is that initially member states, developing countries like India, used to use rulings and decisions of the WTO to trigger policy change domestically. So whether it was the overhaul of our patent law in India, which was which directly flew from a WTO decision, or whether it was environmental legislation and so on after the US tuna case. But now increasingly, because we have more say, and because a small set of countries cannot dictate the rules anymore or set the rules, so we actually can use a lot of, and India being such a massive market, we always negotiate from a position of strength with other countries because they're interested in greater market access with the Indian negotiation. And in that context, whether it is formulating policy positions, whether it is arguing, your legal training equips you to make clear, concise, and cogent briefs. It equips you with a certain analytical ability, which your other peers who are engineers or doctors and so on, and who have joined the civil service may not possess. So certainly, long story short, certainly, I think a legal training really equips you with the kind of skill sets that you need to excel, not just as a diplomat, but most certainly as a trade negotiator. I think it does come in handy.
Great. Anjali, if we can turn to you, what can we gain from your serendipitous journey yourself, but as a practitioner in these tribunals? You researched and briefed and argued a number of cases for governments. How does that process look from inside? And how does one develop, more importantly, a India-based international law litigation practice, right? You've challenged even this whole narrative. You have to be in some barrister's chamber in London. Maybe you are affiliated to them, but you're kind of also a free agent, and you're not at a law firm. So how do you do that? But also, how does one think about developing an international law counsel practice without being tied to a firm or a government? And I think we have Shreyas here, who is also has tried to do that. What would you say prepared you for this international litigation journey?
That's a lot of questions. Okay, so there's no real set pattern as to what you do. Maybe what I'll do is quickly tell you how a case progresses, so you know that people know what goes into international litigation basically. So firstly, as a junior lawyer, you do a bit of everything. The fairly glamorous bits like drafting, but also the very unglamorous things like proofreading or case management or the production of written pleadings. But all litigators do that. It's not only international lawyers. So basically, when a state approaches either a law firm or a senior barrister who's also usually an academic of international law, the lawyer gets together a team of people, and junior lawyers' work starts when a decision is taken to go to court. It all starts with written pleadings, because basically you have to tell the story of the case that you're representing before an international court. You only get one chance to do that because there are no appeals. So to do that, to tell the story, you need to do legal and factual research, both of which are equally important. Cases are lost and won on facts quite often. In that process, there's all kinds of research. I mean, if you're doing a maritime delimitation, for example, you might spend weeks looking at 200-year-old documents at national archives. You may have to spend hours with cartographers studying coastlines if you're doing a maritime delimitation. You may spend hours or months even working out how paramilitaries operated in a particular zone. It depends on the subject matter, but basically you have to get all that together, and you do your basic fact gathering and analysis, which helps you draft the legal proceedings. Then your written proceedings, generally encompass. So it's got, both the factual sections of a memorial, which is the first thing you present to the court, the legal and the factual chapters. Usually, there's several lawyers working on this. Everyone's assigned particular chapters, invariably a bunch of lawyers, because you have state responsibility issues. You might have people specializing in different areas of law and so on. Once the drafts are done, everyone discusses them, several rounds of drafts, meetings, blah, 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 and then you file the case. Then you have the oral rounds after that. And as a junior lawyer, what you're doing is basically assisting the seniors drafting their oral arguments, because it's not like an Anglo-Saxon system where you go in and argue the matter. It's all written down, and you pretty much read a prepared speech. That obviously helps you when you need to, drafting for other people helps you when you have to draft for yourself. So yeah, that's basically the life of a case. In terms of an Indian practice, okay, so like I said, I was lucky because cases that I'd worked on before I came back to India, they had hearings afterwards. So I went back to work on those cases. The reason I could do that is because, there's an element of developing relationships with clients. And that's why they'll call you back. I mean, very honestly, that's why they call me back. And that's why, for example, I worked on this Croatian case for genocide. And then they had a maritime delimitation where they asked me to come back. So that's the India part of it. What was the third? There was a third question there somewhere that I might have missed.
No, I think you covered it well. I think we got what we wanted. We actually did telescope a few questions.
Okay.
Rag, do you want to go next?
Sorry, I'm going to turn to Samir. So we have from Gitanjali and Anjali, who work in, if I can describe them as formal environments in government or in the courts in different tribunals. But Samir, you have been in international NGOs on the ground in Jordan, in Syria, and in Myanmar. Can I ask, how did your legal training help? So Gitanjali spoke about how her legal training helped in the sort of matters that she's dealing with now at the WTO. What kind of skill sets does someone require? What kind of takeaways can we have from the law school if you want to enter the world of international human rights on the ground level?
So I think, and I spoke about this earlier this week in another forum as well. I think for me, the experience in law school helped shape my thinking from how to use law and how to apply legal principles or laws that we know about in a practical way, where it may not be immediately or more easily enforceable within a formal setup. And I think that's what I continue to find of value for me in the kind of work that I do as well. That international law, international treaties, international humanitarian law, the various treaties that countries sign up to don't necessarily lead to obligations that they implement in the field. And while the UN community, the international NGOs are aware of those laws, principles, and treaties, and the member states are aware of them as well, it doesn't always lead to that straight negotiation where this is the law, this is how you must apply. So I think it's basing your understanding on what you've studied, basing your understanding on that legality, trying to see how it would look if it were to be practically implemented, and what are the various negotiation tactics that you can use, what are the various ways in which you can work with a particular government or a non-governmental authority in implementing that and guiding that. So there is the idea of where are you coming from, what is really a justiciable approach towards a particular issue, what are the rights at stake, why must something be done, what is the basis for doing that thing, and then finding that practical negotiation with various authorities who have the responsibility of implementing it. And then at a next level, when there is agreement towards that implementation, then using the legal training and that legal understanding to design the approach of implementing it once the obstacle of agreeing to implement it has been met. So I think that's where I really continue to find the value in what I studied in law school, the kind of courses I studied, and also the analytical thinking. But for me, it was that analytical thinking evolving from a lawyer way of thinking, a lawyerly way of working that I continue to use in my work. And I think it's that ability to understand legal texts and principles and find ways of applying it when there is not necessarily a straightforward path for their application. So I think that's what the relevance has been for me.
Thanks, Samir. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Please go ahead, Vikram.
Yeah. So Nandan, you lead, as we discussed, a cross-border transactional team, right? With lawyers with multiple different legal training from different law schools, from civil law, common law, but also across jurisdictions where different laws apply, traditions apply. Can you describe a typical day in the life of a transactional, global cross-border lawyer? And what are some of the sort of more global issues one deals with in a law firm or a practice that might otherwise be thought of as just a solicitor's or drafting practice?
Yeah. First of all, let me just address one point that I've been thinking about as I look at everything that the panelists have said here. And in the interest of all the other participants, I'm seeing a lot of the questions come in, and a lot of those questions are directed at, how do I get internship? How do I think about getting into refugee law, for example? The first point I do want to make is, going after one's career and where you want to be eventually with a particular objective in mind is not necessarily the best strategy. If I had thought about becoming the energy lawyer at White & Case, or being a human rights lawyer handling conflicts in Syria, or arguing a case before the ICJ, if I were to go back and do that again, I think that would have led to a massive disappointment, apart from the fact that I'm not competent enough to do that. But I just want to throw out the perspective here that a lot of the jobs that people on this panel hold are probably very unique. It's like growing up to be that fielder in the slip position on a cricket team for the Indian cricket team. It's impossible to actually achieve that objective. Just say that. Secondly, in terms of addressing your question, Vikram, day to day, what is the day like? Filled with a lot of conference calls, video conferences, but apart from that, but really, it's the perspective, right? And all of us are representing a certain perspective. Whose perspective are we really dealing with on a day-to-day basis? In my case, and in the case of a lot of lawyers like me in law firms, it's the perspective of the client that you're representing. And we are duty bound by our legal profession to zealously represent the interests of our client. And sometimes those clients are investors, private investors, and sometimes those clients are state entities. And those clients have to be in transactional settings or in dispute settings. And so depending on the setting that we are dealing with, we are essentially trying to figure out how a lot of these clients in the context of international law, how a lot of rules and regulations affect their specific situation, whether it's a given transaction. For example, if somebody is investing in India, for example, we're trying to figure out what kinds of bilateral investment treaties or multilateral investment treaties they may benefit from, how their investment may be affected by the actions of India and what remedies they may have. And that's in the early stages of trying to figure out whether it makes sense and what kinds of investment routes they ought to follow. Or if you are representing a state who is trying to attract investment in their country, you are trying to essentially figure out the various pitfalls in terms of setting up an attractive framework versus really giving up the key aspects of their the economy or the legal regime. Are you making too many concessions to a private sector investor? And how do you ensure that you are doing it fairly and equitably? So some of the bigger issues that you're dealing with, but a lot of the details for younger lawyers are much more mundane, right? And you can't go off to advising your clients about these big fundamental existential issues without dealing with the mundane aspects that we all deal with, we've all grown up dealing with, and we can't lose sight of that. And we got to really, as lawyers, admit to ourselves that this profession is going to be filled with a lot of drudgery and a lot of detail. And if we don't have the aptitude and appetite for dealing with that, we're not going to be successful in doing what we're doing.
Thank you,
Nandan. That was, I think, a great, we have to take a step back and put ourselves in the shoes of the students who are listening in and how they have to, start planning their career. And, if you look at the stars in the firmament, you may just, fall on your path. I'm going to turn to Neha. I'm going to take a cue from Nandan's sort of practical standpoint. So Neha, we have a number of questions from students, and I have many students at NLS as well, who are interested in making a career in public international law. But they're confused. Do I do an LLM? Do I do a PhD? Do I go to Europe? Do I go to the US? What's the difference in those law schools? We now have a number of international tribunals where you can get internships as well. And you have worked at the Office of the Prosecutor in Cambodia. So how do students go about thinking, given the stage that they are at, how do they go about trying to find a path that works for them in this vast terrain of public international law, academia?
So I think what's also important to emphasize, again, taking a cue from Nandan, is that what you're seeing is no one writes the time that they didn't succeed at something on their CV. So when Vikram reads out our CVs or how we got here or what we've done in our lives, the CV doesn't mention all the times we tried to get something and it didn't work out, which is, and no one's CV, public CV mentions that. And that's probably 90% of anybody's CV who's reached anywhere in life, especially if it's been an unconventional path. So I just want to emphasize that because, again, there are lots of students. And so it's not as if everything works out. And sometimes the things that don't work out that you really wanted might in fact have directed you towards what you're doing right now, which is also pretty cool and makes you happy. So there's no one sort of one-shot recipe for, you know, how do I get to a certain point career-wise, whether it's academically or otherwise. And that's also true about choosing between your options for a career in public international law. Sometimes you're constrained by simply mundane things like funding. So some universities, some jurisdictions have funding, some tribunals have funding, some international organizations for their internships have funding, and some don't. And some people can afford to go and self-fund themselves, or, you know, they may have access to scholarships and things like that, but some people may not. So it's to also be realistic about, you know, and to be honest with yourself about what you can afford, what's your level of risk. Not everybody will have the same level of risk, either as a matter of personality or as a matter of social support. That's the third thing. I don't think any of us on this panel would caution you from being as ambitious as possible. And to some extent, all of us have been risk friendly, which is why, you know, we've had the meandering journeys that we have had. But it also depends a lot on your social support and the network you have. And so again, you might be very differently placed in your life if you're in a caretaking position, if you're in a caregiving position, if you have personal considerations that don't allow you to move around freely without worrying about, you know, what the next position is going to be. If you can afford a 3-month, 6-month temporary contract, which is the typical contract in NGOs, INGOs, and humanitarian organizations at the beginning, you have a 3-month contract. After that, who knows? At the beginning. So again, a lot of your choices are constrained by your personal circumstances, and there's nothing wrong with that, because everybody has their own very different set of constraints and their own very different propensities for wanting to take a risk. So all you can do, honestly, is figure out what you're most enthusiastic about, and then try and match that with what's available to you. So if you're most enthusiastic about, I don't know, Victoria's theory of international law, America is not the place for you. There's no one working on Victoria in America. So, you know, so you have to be based in Europe. Again, if you want to work on, you know, Italian intellectuals in the 16th century who were writing about international law, maybe you should start with learning Italian, because you can't really read the text in the absence of that. So it's very, very much dependent on, you know, where your interests lie, and then trying to find the most appropriate match given your circumstances.
Thank you, Neha. So I just wanted to draw on what you just last, which is to learn Italian in Italy. But I think that issue of language also ties into some of the questions we're getting on what students can do. With that in mind, I wanted to begin with Turod as we wrap up this round and then take in more questions. You're a quintessential generalist, right? And I kind of consider myself as a generalist too, because I live in different lives, right? But right. Is that helpful to be more a generalist these days, or is it better to be a declared specialist? This is my niche: international cybercrime law, or the law of artificial intelligence, and that's what I'm going to do for the next. And then market yourself, rather than us who were, I think because we were somewhat of pioneers in a field where we were just entering, we had to do whatever we could get. So any thoughts on this generalist versus specialist when you're preparing to be an international lawyer?
Thank you. I think this is a very, interesting, but also I think practical, question, because what I learned, now past 23 years of a professional career is that you actually need to be both a generalist, but also a specialist in at least your area interests, or what career would you like to pursue, So I think the beauty and the uniqueness of the National Law School itself is giving that opportunity, to be both generalist, like in the legal subject, but also social sciences, including the economics, political science, sociology, but also to be a specialist. And that's why I think I think it's still the case in the final year, fifth year, we had a seminars, where it was an opportunity, at least kind of at the base level, to be to do some specialization, So when I was back in Mongolia, actually, I was wondering what I'm going to do with, like I took, I think, comparative constitutional law, elections law, economic offenses, and the international trade law, the commercial law. So when I was back to Mongolia, I was wondering what to do with this, But somehow, along this past, I think, 2 decades, all the subjects were useful, and I used them, I think, to the fullest extent, Like in Ministry of Justice, I was involved in the drafting of the civil aviation law, constitutional law, I think many actually in Mongolian legal community knows me as a constitutional lawyer, a constitutional expert, the elections law, now I'm working with the, for example, with the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, which is based in Stockholm, Sweden, on the political finance and electoral reform programs, or the latest, the international commercial law. And I'm now also advising the Mongolian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, in this field. So I think it's a challenging, but I think it's a doable. And what I would, kind of to kind of a base touch, I'm also reading the questions. I think the best, I think, if and I think most of the participants today are interested in international relations or working in international organizations. I would advise one practical tip which I learned, along the 2 decades. There's a very practical site called unjobs.org, and there you can find like every job which I think suits you, and I would advise you, to go to the areas of your interest. There are also a list of organizations, and look at the requirements of the jobs, the qualifications required, and try to be, that, And for me, Vikram, I wouldn't say I was also a generalist in a sense, because between 2005 to 2006, you mentioned I took actually a sabbatical leave for 1 year to do a Masters of Law. And there were actually, and I was fortunate to be selected as a Chevening Scholar. And there were, for me, 3 offers, one was from Warwick University on public international law. Second was on human rights from the LSE, the London School of Economics and Political Science. And third was SOAS, School of Oriental African Studies in the University College London. So I took a subject which I thought would be useful for me in the future, So at the UCL, I took classes in international human rights law and the United Nations law, whereas at the School of Oriental and African Studies, the basically development economics and the developing countries, the globalization subjects. So I think this is, I would say, I think the most, I think, shortcut, short way to pursue or to plan rather, your career in the international, let's say, relations or international organizations field. Thank you.
Thank you, Turod. So we're running out of time, and this, of course, has been a very rich discussion. And this is a challenge of doing something with 6 people, but of course, that brings in the richness. So we'll try and go to the questions now and sort of answer some of the more practical questions, especially. And I also want to put on the chat a link that I just received from Priya Pillai, who is one of our stars from NLS, who basically works in the field of international criminal law. And she actually wrote a very good piece for Bar and Bench on how to prepare to become an international lawyer. So some of your questions might be answered then. It's a good takeaway link. But before that, Nandan, I think 3 or 4 questions in the chat seem to address to you. How do you navigate this world of law firms, right? And not just international law firms, but you were when you applied for a job, you were probably the first Indian whose resume landed on their desk, right? Which is a totally different scene now. I'm sure you get many, many more. How do you stand out? What would you say takes an applicant to stand out in this, what I call the 10-second rule, right? People are looking at a resume for 10 seconds and yes or no. Any practical tips on that? And there's marketing yourself as an international person, say you know a language, you wrote an article on that. Does that help you stand out?
Yeah, good question, Vikram. The area has been changing so much, right? From the days when I applied to law firms to now, it's a world of a difference between what the market was like then and what it is like now. I was really fascinated by working at an international law firm at that point of time, just wanted to get a couple of years of experience and go back to India. But these days, there are a lot of Indian law firms who compete with international law firms on some of these matters and compete for similar talent. And it's not as clear cut that working for an international law firm is actually more rewarding than working for an Indian law firm, for that matter. It just really depends on the kind of ecosystem that you're looking for, both within the law firm as well as in the broader legal profession. How do you make yourself stand out? It's a combination of a lot of different things, right? People are looking for this, interest in a lot of areas that are actually relevant for the position that they are interviewing the candidate for or looking at the candidate. And it's really incumbent upon the people applying for these jobs to fully really understand what it is that their employer is looking for. Quite often, candidates send me resumes interested in working in energy, infrastructure, and project finance, but they write about all the beautiful articles that they have written in, let's say, intellectual property rights. Nothing against intellectual property rights, right? But we are not likely to hire a candidate who is immersed in intellectual property rights if we're looking for a candidate to work in the energy infrastructure space. So I think there is a little bit about, to be honest, to put it bluntly, marketing yourself. Yourself. You need to understand your audience. Who are you talking to? What are they interested in? And highlight the things in your resume that are really attractive to them. Because as we've talked about, we've all done a lot of different things. And in the early days of applying for jobs, it's actually impossible to say, really, I went and argued a matter that was perfectly suited for what the employer is interested in hearing, but actually highlight those kinds of skills that generally touch upon the kind of work that you are going to be doing and identifying. But at the end of the day, certainly being, focused on your writing skills and showing your ability to stay on a particular topic, research, and show your ability to analyze complex issues, and being simply enterprising, reaching out and looking for opportunities. And how did you make use of the opportunities that were presented to you? And how do you show that grit? Without all the resources, you're actually able to make something out of nothing. And so to me, I look at a lot of those aspects, and certainly look, and I saw a number of questions. Does the name of law school help you? Of course, the name of the law school helps you. That's a reality. But more and more, I look at the candidates. I actually look at where were you and how far did you come, as opposed to, somebody who was given a silver platter and actually benefited from a lot of the advantages that one had.
Thank you very much, Nandan. I just wanted to go quickly to Gitanjali before I hand it over to Rag. Gitanjali, I think there are quite a few questions, in fact, even from a high school student, on what to do for the civil service. And if you want to be a diplomat, right? So most of us are lawyers. Can you talk to that? What does it take to be a diplomat? Somebody else has accused of all of us of meandering around and coming to it. So they want to know, is there a straight, fast track journey? So maybe we can start with you. What are the typical activities? This is from Shimoni to Ms. Gitanjali, such as mooting or other factors that developed your interests in PIL, Public International Law and International Relations. What skill sets does the UPSC panel at the interview stage look at when allotting an IFS to an individual? That's an interesting question. Other question is, Gitanjali ma'am, regarding the generalists, how can a fresh law graduate be certain about a particular choice of service? Well, I think you can answer that quickly, but I was also going to ask about language. I know you are now fluent in French, which may not be the case with most of us. And I know the IFS trains people, but does that something also give you an edge in international law? Thanks, Gitanjali.
Thank you, Vikram, for all of those questions. So I'll take them one at a time, because to begin with your last question on the importance of language, most certainly, if you speak the language, it really improves access, and particularly in a bilateral posting, but also in a multilateral posting. I chose French primarily because I was interested in multilateral work, and French comes in handy a lot. But also in Paris, when I was working with the Quai d'Orsay, which is the French Foreign Office, you can't get too far without being sufficiently competent in the way you speak the language. What also helped was that I went to the École Nationale d'Administration, which is the French National School of Administration. So that really helped with the immersion, because your mode of instruction is in French, and you're writing your exams in French and so on. And I think learning any language, because we have Saket, like you said, who's joined and who's doing an interpreter level course in German now. We have Aparna, who studied Chinese. So Indian diplomats get to study a variety of languages.
Yeah, and we have on the call Atit, who just joined from latest IFS NLS, who's studying Persian in our embassy in Tehran. So
I think when you're a diplomat and when you're doing a lot of the sort of outreach for your country, knowing the language is certainly it's a very useful asset to have. I've seen that also in our green room and sort of sideline negotiations and back channel negotiations, that if you go and speak to people. So because I speak French, I'm fairly competent with Spanish, and I can read and understand Italian, because if you know one Romance language, you tend to have a felicity for the rest. So that's helped. And I think it makes such a big difference if I go and talk to the African delegations in French, or if I go and speak to the Hispanophone delegations in Spanish. It makes a tremendous impact, and it really helps you to gain access. So that's with respect to language. And I think not just for diplomacy, but across the world, knowing the way that our job market is now, if you're interested in a career in public international law or the Foreign Service, knowledge of a foreign language is most definitely an asset. Your other question was about the generalist versus specialist debate in government. And I know that Durod has already touched upon this, but in government specifically, when you're dealing with such a wide cross-section of stakeholders and the kind of people you're talking to, you can go lawyer on them. You can go too technical on them, because the minute you do that, your political bosses, or even like the secretary, would remind you and say, but please keep in mind the bigger policy objectives of the government. So you need to certainly have that balance between being extremely, having that domain knowledge, because you cannot try and accomplish the big policy objectives unless you're doing the specific small day-to-day tasks of dealing with your other interlocutors in terms of moving those objectives forward. So I think it's important to have a bit of both, but to not go too pedantic on your political bosses, certainly, and to know that the way that you can frame or articulate a position is in a way that does not seem that you're reading them the black letter of the law or legal texts and agreements. So it's very important to balance that in government. Moving on about how I chose the Foreign Service, I think it's like Nandan said, like Neha said earlier, taking a cue from them. It really depends on your personal propensities and interests. For me, I thought that I was really interested in world history, in international affairs, in foreign policy. So I thought that, and plus I was I think I had a curiosity about the world and about other cultures, about wanting to learn other languages. So I thought that personally for me, that was a good fit. I also felt that I did have a calling for public service. And like you said, representing a country of 1.3 billion people at different global tables, it's certainly something that I am extremely privileged to do. And I take it very seriously. So long story short, I think you just need to follow what your personal interests are and what you're enthusiastic about and what your passions are, because you can't possibly try and fit yourself into a round peg in a square hole. You really need to figure out what works for you. And I think your last question was about the preparation for the UPSC exam. That's there's a gazillion like articles out there for that. I would say that it's such a general exam. The most daunting thing is that it's extremely fact specific. It's very fact intensive. So I think if you are signing up for the process, then it does make sense to be curious about the world and to be interested in the world, and not just not be very now, of course, from the time that I took the exam, they've changed the syllabus a lot. They've changed the process a lot. So now there's a huge focus on general studies, which could be anything from government schemes to geography to science. So you really just need to have a general interest in the world around you and be curious. That's it. I don't want to take longer. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gitanji. I was going to hand it over to Rag, but I just wanted to say we've got a lot more questions to you, and maybe they should organize a separate event for IFS, and especially you coming back. We'll also put up on the screen after Rag finishes or just talks some of the other NLS alumni from who are working in the field, including your colleagues in the IFS, but also some of our colleagues in some of these other disciplines. Right? The reason this is such an unwieldy panel is the field is so big, but it shows you the richness and diversity, but also the cross currents. Over to you, Rag.
So thanks, Vikram. I'm just sharing the screen anyway so that all the students can have an eye on the different alumni they can possibly reach out to speak to and have a chat with. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm just going to ask some quick questions that we've had in our chat for Neha and for Anjali. There is a general concern that there's not much space for practicing international law, either as a counsel practice or in academics in India, and one has to go abroad. What would you say to someone who's in that position? Is it possible to be based in India and still try and practice international law? And for Neha, especially, we had the 12 scholars, but we seem to have had a missing generation in India. So do you think that we need to ramp up international law scholarship in India in a serious way? Neha, if you can go first, and then we'll go to Anjali.
Yeah, so I think 12, which was, of course, an extremely important movement. What's happened now is that 12 is almost mainstream. So I would say that there's lots of people who are not based in India or not even based in Asia who are now 12 scholars or amongst the most prominent voices in 12. What's changed is that perhaps they could not actually have done a lot of what they're doing had they not left for some time or the other. Professor Jimny is an exception, but a lot of the other 12 scholars like Balakrishna Ralgopadan and other people like that, they spent a lot of their careers abroad. Ratna Kapoor, they spent a lot of their careers abroad because there was perhaps a lack of space in Indian law schools, not at places like JNU, which were all but the bastion, but Indian law schools didn't have very much space for you being an international law academic. And I think that's actually changed. Now you actually have many more opportunities to be an academic in India, including in international law. It doesn't hurt, it will never hurt to leave for a while, no matter where you're based, not just in India, whether you're based in America, whether you're based in Europe. You will not be a good international lawyer if you haven't left for a while. And so I think that's just par for the course, whether you're an academic or whether you're something else. But I think compared to when I was in India, certainly the number of options that's open to you now with the new law school, with think tanks, with all kinds of movements in India towards public international law, it's possible to be very much at the table with the rest of your colleagues around the world, doing pure public international law, not even 12 necessarily, and being equally part of the conversation. So I would say it's easier, but I would recommend leaving to almost everyone if they want to be an international lawyer for at least a while, and then see when you want to come back.
Anjali, from a counsel's point of view, would you tend to agree with Neha?
Completely agree with Neha. Very honestly, no one is going to come to a lawyer who's never left India to represent them before an international court or forum. That's not going to happen. So I completely agree with what Neha says. That said, there are two advantages that I see being an Indian as opposed to several other nationalities. One is a familiarity with the common law system, and the other is knowing English. And I think both. Obviously French would be an added asset, and so I'd put that in the skill set that we've generally been talking about. Also, like Neha said, there's, whether it's academia or even practice. I mean, at the moment, for example, there are two judges, a judge at the International Court of Justice and a judge at ITLOS who are both Indians. There's a growing visibility of public international law practice in India in a way because of the Jadhav case or the Italian Marines case. And off the top of my head, I can think of, two cases that are before the Supreme Court with public international law elements to it. I mean, there's, the Rohingya case, which had an intervention by the Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, etc., and the UN Commission of High Commission for Human Rights, who intervened in the challenges, various CAA challenges. So yes, I completely agree with Neha. To cut a long story short.
All right, that was I think that was very practical advice. You have to get out, but you can possibly then also come back in with some more experience. Vikram, would you like to wrap things up? And I think we have a final question for Turod. I know we are over time.
Yeah.
Very appreciative for
I was just going to say, Turo's already generously shared links. We've got lots of questions about connecting people. I think we'll try and do that on a case-by-case basis. Many people are on LinkedIn. But I also think that, in addition to UN jobs that Turod mentioned, there's World Bank and IMF jobs, which are also open. And then I think there is a very good LinkedIn page on international organizations jobs, the relations jobs. So I think that at least, except for maybe the junior most, someone from the junior most batch, I don't know, is that Neha? I don't know. I can safely say all the others on this panel did not have the opportunities. Even typing on the internet didn't exist. So I do think you, as competitive as it is, you have a lot more resources and we should use them. Also blogging, Priya Pillai, for instance, from our law school, is a quintessential blogger. She writes for Opinio Juris, the top international law blog. So that's another way to make yourself out there. Twitter, there are lots of NLS people tweeting on international law, foreign policy, and that's another way to put your name out there. This question on internships came up, and maybe I can ask that to Turod, and then we can wrap up. Were there any other questions we haven't asked? There's a question about the JAG. I don't know if we this is a very wide-ranging panel, but I don't think we had, I don't know, maybe Samir can talk about JAG because he works in conflict zones. Question about Devashish Krishnan, he is the legal advisor for Bahrain. So that's also another interesting way. You can actually be a legal advisor to a country. In fact, I think Lavanya was counsel to some countries in the climate change negotiations, and he is sort of the legal advisor to the Bahrain Home Minister. But he did that after a career at an international law firm doing energy work like Nandan, and then went into that. So, it's kind of a mixed bag. Okay, maybe Turod, very quickly, that last question. Okay, maybe Turod's not there, I guess.
Yes.
Was there? Oh, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. So I think my last. Okay, I mean, let me start actually with your internship. Yes, I think someone was referring that maybe for Indians, like the young professionals program may not be like for a time being applicable. But if you go again to the unjobs.org, there are plenty of internship opportunities, like from, I don't know, Vienna to Nairobi to wherever, in Americas. So I think there is a lot of opportunities. And I also posted, I think at least, another 4 or 5, let's say, web links online with the international or overseas work, including in the careers generally in the UN, but also in the development field. But my a piece of advice is actually to go again by the let's say by the motto of our national law school, Dharmo Rakshati Rakshita, those who protect the law are protected by law. So this has been kind of for me a guiding, let's say, principle or light, and of course I think. For me, my batchmate, including like from Vikram to my another dear roommate, Shamnad Bashir, late. They have been, and also, you know, the Manika Guruswami, our also another illustrious batchmate, have been a kind of also a guiding, let's say, torchlights, you know. So they've been, I think, I would advise to reach out without any shyness, or to those who are especially working in the international relations or international organizations. And I think they will be always be would be ready to be not just your kind of a guide, but also a friend and philosopher. And I would advise also those who are attending this to look at the stories which Nigam is putting, you know, the advice to the law school students. Including the last one, I think was 17th on his 17th, I think, again for guide notes, you know, on the, I think, which is relevant also in pursuing the international career. So this is kind of in a nutshell, you know, what I would advise. I mean, sincerely and heartfeltedly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will hand it over to Rag now to conclude, because I know we went way over time. But I just wanted to add one more thing. We have alumni actually in a lot more places we didn't have time to name, but it also requires a little sleuthing. I always give the example of the UN, right? The UN is not just the building in New York. The UN is a massive organization, all of which have individual parts. Every day I learn of a new UN organization or a special rapporteur that didn't exist, right? If you go to Geneva, you walk around International Square, there are about 40 organizations. Each of them will be looking for lawyers, policy people. And even the World Bank or the IMF, we have 19 other development banks. There is not a single Indian in ADB or in the Asian Infrastructure Bank. There's somebody in the NDB. So all of these are great opportunities. You just have to think very creatively because there are lots of places open. It's just that it's a matter of finding them. Over to you, Rag, for the last words, and thank you again.
So thanks, everyone. I think it's a great note to end on if we have Turo, an international student alumni from Mongolia, quoting, you know, a Sanskrit verse from the Mahabharata. I think that's a lovely endpoint to this talk on international careers. I really wish that we had something like this when I was at the law school, because I've thoroughly enjoyed this and I wish we could go on for a longer time. Thank you again to all our panelists, and thank you to everyone who joined in. I hope you go away from this panel excited and enthused for a career in international law. I think there are so many opportunities that are open now. And if, I think as all the panelists said, you're open to a little bit of wandering and a little bit of getting lost, then to use the cliched phrase, you can enjoy the journey and you know, really make a successful career out of this field. We'll be circulating a document to all the participants with all the links that have been circulated and with additional information. And again, thank you to everyone who joined in, and we hope to see all, if not most of the panelists at the law school soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nandan, Samir, Neha, Gitanjali, Anjali, and Turo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rag, for doing a great job. Thanks, Rag. And I also want to thank the SBA, Vignesh and Surbi of CIPLR, or whatever the new thing is called at NLS, and all the NLS students who volunteered. I'm very grateful to all of them, and the NLS IT folks too.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
You're okay, Rag? We're done?
Yeah, we're done. I'm just waiting for the IT to close the discussion.
Okay,
and
good.
Just collate all the links.
Yeah, that's why I didn't want to lose the links. Which is why I was trying to wait. Turo, thanks again. I know it's very late there. What time is it in Ulaanbaatar? Turo, what time is it in Ulaanbaatar?
Yeah, actually, it's quite early. It's just 11:15 p.m. Like we're just 2.5 hours behind Delhi, but I think it's still exactly 12 hours with Washington, D.C., right?
But all my colleagues are scared of going there. They think it's too cold at this time of the year. So,
is it?
yeah. You're close to Siberia, right? So, anyway, thanks again. I think getting you was really cool because don't you think, Rag? Because
Absolutely.
in a way, it's getting someone who's very proud of his Indian education and also has gone on to do so many things. It's amazing. So. Good, Rag. There were lots of questions for a recording and for links. I guess you take care of them, and we should do a follow up maybe with the IFS folks, or with maybe only law firms. But I think that this just showed the richness of the field, right? So,
absolutely, yeah. There's a lot more to be said. It was a bit of an unwieldy panel because there was too much coming in. But I think if we can have more discussions, then I think everyone will find it really helpful. But this was really fantastic, and especially Turod, to have him dial in from Mongolia. Thanks again for coming.
Okay, good.
Yeah, thank you, Rag. Thank you for inviting. Yeah, it was a great pleasure.
It was all right. Bye bye, everyone.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah.